I'm delighted to be on stage with my esteemed colleague, Elleke Boehmer, who is the Executive Director of the Centre. And we thought we would just have a conversation about life writing, because obviously life writing is something that figures fairly largely in our day-to-day activities. We are steeped in life writing, and sometimes it's easy to go off on tangents, and we have people working on a huge array of projects here at the Centre. Sometimes they can be fairly niche. And so we thought it would be lovely, as we have some wonderful visiting master's students from Vancouver with us for this week and for next week, to have 2 sessions just on life writing, no bells and whistles, just start going right back to the basics. And so Elleke and I thought for tonight that we would think about fact and fiction. Can we trust the biographer, and should we? And those kinds of questions. So that's what we're going to talk about. But firstly, just to say welcome to the beginning of our new year here at Wolfson. We have a typically packed term card of events. We never seem to learn. We are always, there are just too many exciting things to do, and we like to put them on. So we have an array of them for you this term. Just to say, the second in this little mini-series is with Hermione Lee, who I will be delighted to be talking to, the entire directorial team, which will be next week, on next Tuesday. We also have a book launch here on Thursday with Josef Vosk's new book, New Life Joke Shops, Travels and Observations, which will be great fun, and that'll be in the Buttery. So do come along to that. And also, as our term card and our programme of events starts, so do our ways of supporting everybody's writing, whether you feel like you might want to dabble with writing and you've never done it before, or whether it's your 7th book and you just would like a bit of a community around you because it's a lonely business. We have something, hopefully, that will be there for you. We have a friends scheme, friends who meet every Monday and have directed sessions on life writing with writer Rebecca Abrams. We have online writing groups on Thursdays, so anywhere in the world you can be part of that. And we also have a writing retreat in Tuscany, which is as nice as it sounds in the spring. So do sign up for that if you would like to. We have the term programme here in these leaflets, so do take one away. Sign up, make sure you're on the mailing list, and do consider, if you'd like to, joining the Friends scheme. Every penny of it goes towards our work in the community, our outreach programmes, supporting our Global Majority Visiting Scholars programme now. So it's all very, very well used and enormously appreciated by us. So first of all, we have Elleke. Hooray.
And we also have Kate, so I'm going to...
Marvellous. That was us introducing each other.
So just to kind of kick this back and forth like a ping pong game, I thought I'd just introduce Kate for those who haven't met her yet, and for those who do know Kate, because she is a woman of many talents and many roles, and it's actually extraordinary how much she keeps in the air. I have great pleasure in introducing Kate Kennedy, the director of the Centre for Life Writing, where I'm the executive director. This is how we kind of separate our roles. Kate is a writer extraordinaire, a cellist extraordinaire, and a broadcaster extraordinaire. If those of you who may have tuned into Radio 3 yesterday would have heard Kate on the Nightingale, and listening to nightingales and imitating nightingale sound with musical instruments. Kate is also a biographer of note. She has written a biography of Ivor Gurney, the war poet, and she also now has this amazing object biography about the cello, which actually also it involves a kind of assemblage of life stories blended in and through and worked out with a range of extraordinary cellos. And we're going to touch on that a little bit,
Sure, yeah.
And the process of writing that. So that's only just scratching the surface, but I did just want to pitch in and introduce Kate. So we're going to, we don't have a chair, we're kind of batting it back and forth between us. So back to Kate.
Thank you. Well, any part of that pales into insignificance compared to Elleke's many achievements. Elleke is, as she said, the executive director here at Occlu. She's written what was 5 novels and has now just become 6 novels, wonderful, wonderful novels. And one of them we're going to talk about today, novel, autobiography, memoir, who knows, these are slippery categories. But her most recent hot off the press novel, Ice Shock, I think will be for sale outside Lit, or not quite yet?
Not yet. It's published at the end of the year. So
okay.
There's an event at Black Horse that will advertise.
Looks like this. Look out for it. It's marvellous.
It will be advertised on the Occlu mailings. So,
but there are some of your book, The Shouting in the Dark, for sale outside afterwards. I believe we'll come on to that. Elleke is the Professor of World Literature here in the English faculty at Oxford, and she's a founding figure in post-colonial studies, and also a very esteemed biographer, the biographer of Nelson Mandela, which is a book that's been translated into about as many languages as I can think of, I think. And
that's because of Mandela, it's not because of me.
So I'm really delighted to work with you and learn from you here at Occlu. It's a great, great, great pleasure and a privilege. So we're going to think together about some of these issues that all biography has to address, namely that we read first-person books, particularly for proximity, not just to events, but to the person writing and to their lives and their responses to the events that happen to them. But what does this trust mean? We have to believe that what we're reading is true if it is a first-person book, a work of non-fiction. And trust in life writing, perhaps, is plural. There's the trust that we can verify, the dates and the diagnoses and the documents. And if we want to be fancy, we could call that epistemic trust. But there's also the trust that we feel, a voice that seems ethically answerable to reality, an affective trust, if you like. So we want to set those two dials, verifiable trust and felt trust, against a handful of books. Firstly, a First World War ambulance driver's account of her experiences in France. Then the 2018 best-selling The Salt Path, and against Elleke's own work, The Shouting in the Dark, which we'll come on to. And I hope that can start a discussion with you all as well as us about what the truth pact is between the writer and the reader, and how, and even if, we can draw lines between fact and fiction in life writing. The question perhaps isn't which one lies, but it's how we read when truth comes in different flavours. So there have been multiple scandals surrounding books marketed as memoirs that were later found to be partially or wholly falsified. In 2006, the Smoking Gun website reported that large parts of James Fry's 2003 memoir about his struggles with drug and alcohol addiction and his recovery, A Million Little Pieces, were exaggerated or fabricated. Readers who felt misled filed lawsuits against both Fry and his publisher, Random House. The LA Times reported, and The Guardian reported, that he said if he could do the situation over, he would be more clear up front about the fact that it was a manipulated text, that it was a text that was not a work of non-fiction. Similarly, in 2015, Penguin Random House in Australia withdrew copies of The Whole Pantry recipe book by the influencer Belle Gibson, who built her career on the false claim that she had cancer. Gibson claimed she was wrongly diagnosed by an alternative wellness practitioner. I bet she was pleased when she got the real diagnosis. And there are different shades of true that we accept that aren't quite so clear-cut as those. Ghost-written biographies posing as autobiography, which we still read as fact, even with the raised eyebrow of, I bet someone who wrote this for them. Even though we know that the I is a complicated one, we very often still believe it. And there are loads more. I'm sure we can all think of more. But I'm going to look first at Helen Zenna Smith's Not So Quiet, Stepdaughters of War, which was written in 1930, just to kick us off. So Helen Zenna Smith, Not So Quiet, Stepdaughters of War. I'll read you a little bit of it so you get a flavour to start with. The convoy is late. We're all lined up waiting. Even the 5 newcomers are at last towing the line. But the long, crawling length of train does not round the bend. Little groups of stretcher bearers stand about shivering and cursing the delay. Some of them warm their hands at our radiators. 2 of them are in high spirits. They have been drinking. Commandant is eyeing them. She will report them before the night is much older. It is seldom the stretcher bearers take to drink, but one can quite understand their giving way. There are times when I would drug myself with spirits if I could lay my hands on anything to shut out the horrors of these convoys. Some of the girls begin to tramp about the station yard. I'm too numb to get down. I suppose I still possess feet, though I cannot feel them. The wind has dropped slightly, but it seems to get colder and colder. Oh, this cold of France. I've never experienced anything remotely resembling it. It works through one's clothing, into one's flesh and bones. It's not satisfied till it's firmly ingrained in one's internal regions, from whence it never really moves. It has been freezing hard for over a week now. The bare trees in the road are loaded with icicles, tall trees, ugly and gaunt and gallows-like, till the whiteness veiled them, transforming them into objects of weird beauty. Etta Potato and the Bug want me to come down. They're having a walking race with Tosh for cigarettes, the winner to collect one each from the losers. Won't I join in? I refuse. I am too numb to move. Off they start across the snow-covered yard. Tosh wins easily. Their laughter rings out as she exhorts her winnings there and then. All of a sudden, their laughter ceases. They fly back to their posts. The convoy must be sighted. I crane my neck. Yes, the stretcher bearers stop smoking and line up along the platform. Ambulance doors are opened in readiness. All is bustle, everyone on the alert. Cogs in the great machinery. I can hear the noise of the train distinctly now. Sound travels a long way in the snow in these death-still early morning hours before the dawn, louder and louder. So that's just a little flavour of the sentences in this first-person memoir, experience of an ambulance driver just behind the front in France. This I that we hear of Helen Zenna Smith is the I of the narrator and of the author, and it's a slippery I. She's variously known as Helen Zenna Smith, Nell, Nellie, Smithy, Smith. She slips between social class depending on where she is between the home and front. But she's slipperier than that. The book is actually written by a journalist and children's author called Evadne Price. She never went near the front and didn't serve in the war. Her adoption of the pseudonym Helen Zenna Smith was precipitated by All Quiet on the Western Front, written in 1929, Erich Maria Remarque's stark account of the German trenches, drawing on first-hand experience. Beneath the gloss of the 1920s, memories of the First World War lingered. The economic and social disruptions of the decade which followed offered its heroes small comfort. And in this troubled atmosphere, Remarque's book became a bestseller, translated and published worldwide. And so a British publisher conceived the idea of a woman's book in reply, All Quaint on the Western Front by Erica Remarques. And Evadne Price, can you imagine? Evadne Price was approached to write this spoof. And she wasn't keen, I can't imagine why, so instead offered to produce a realistic account of a woman's experience of war. She made contact with a woman called Winifred Young, who'd apparently kept a diary of her work as an ambulance driver on the Western Front, and thus Not So Quiet was born. On first publication in 1930, many reviewers and readers took Not So Quiet to be a first-hand diary memoir because that's how it was packaged and that's how it was publicised. Over time, it settled into the category of a novel, but the early reception was shaped by the book's deliberate documentary prose. And so, thinking about today, I looked back at exactly what you would have received had you bought this in a bookshop in 1930. So the book by Helen Zenna Smith, the narrator's name, and the jacket claim it was, and I quote, an honest, unsentimental, savage record of a girl ambulance driver in France, and even categorically states, this is not a story. The publisher credited on the first edition, and still credited, in fact, in my Virago copy, is Albert E. Marriott. And what I didn't know until very recently was that he has since been linked to the confidence trickster Natalie Lucas, which helps explain the kind of aggressive truth claims in the marketing. You know, this is an honest, savage account. Albert E. Marriott didn't exist. So, but coming on to him, reviewers treated it, as one might, as a testimony. A contemporaneous Manchester Guardian noticed summarised the book as if reporting real service. They said the author was attached to a convoy under the command of a domineering and heartless commandant. And it was an immediate success. It was hugely popular, with stunt publicity in London. There were even young women driving ambulances to promote the book. It's the kind of publicity you want, isn't it? And a Broadway stage adaptation in the same year. So Natalie Lucas, Albert E. Marriott, I did a little bit of digging to find out about Natalie Lucas. And it turns out, interestingly enough for us, that he was a confidence trickster turned publisher. Born in 1903, died in 1940. He was famous in the tabloids as a gentleman crook. As a teenager, he impersonated a naval midshipman, lived on credit in high society, and was repeatedly prosecuted for fraud. And after 1924, he rebranded himself as a journalist, author, and minor publisher. And the scandal, the reason why he was imprisoned, was his serial impostures, posing as war heroes, interestingly, or as aristocrats to obtain goods and money. There were multiple court appearances and prosecution. He published dubious biographies and confessional books, sensational articles that were later exposed as being ghost-written or fabricated. He wrote fake royal biographies, authorised that weren't authorised, under pen names such as Evelyn Graham, and then he created this publisher persona, Albert E. Marriott, under which he published Helen Zenna Smith / Evadne Price's book. He was arrested and convicted over attempts to sell bogus manuscripts. And then, after he was released from prison, what did he do? He wrote a memoir, Myselves in the plural, in 1934, and became quite famous. Newspapers remember him in his obituaries as an accomplished fabulist. So he's a good storyteller in his own right, just perhaps not the right side of ethically okay. And why, of course, this matters for a book such as Not So Quiet, which is a very moving, very powerful First World War testimony, is because we understand why he's pushing it, why he's pushing this reading of it to us. This is part of the extremely cynical apparatus for finding a good story and pumping it out into the world, irrespective of the ethical considerations that we tie ourselves in knots over, hopefully as biographers who have some kind of conscience. So I'm really interested in how that reframes this book, which is a great book. It's a wonderful read. But it's only in the last 30 years or so that it's actually been recategorized as a novel. In Sharon Audit's bibliography of women writers of the First World War, which is the kind of go-to book, I don't think I've got it here, it's the go-to book of listing everything women wrote about war experience, she very clearly has it under her fiction section, so she is repositioning it quite literally for us. And when it was reissued in 1989 by the feminist press and later by Virago, it was reborn as a novel. And the Virago introduction to my copy by the great critic Barbara Hardy works very hard to tread a line between claiming it for a novel and justifying its first-person pretense. She calls it a war story and tries to situate it in, and I quote, a long-established tradition of the same. Virgil used Homer, inventively and admiringly. Shakespeare used Plutarch, and in the same spirit, James Joyce used Homer, Dante, and Shakespeare. In smaller scope, and perhaps without awareness of the ancestral modes of remodelling, Evadne Price wrote her novel out of praise and pacifist fellow feeling. Refusing to invent a war experience, she came across Winifred Constance Young and found facts for her fiction. The novel's first readers assumed it was a memoir, though no attentive reader of remark could have thought so, since aspects of his structure, language, and action are remodelled, freshly but faithfully. So Barbara makes a case for excusing Evadne Price by lining her up with the literary greats, whilst acknowledging that she didn't know that she was doing this literary remodelling. And it's our fault for believing this diary-esque memoir because we haven't read Remarque attentively enough. And if we had, we would pick up on the structural parallels and the parallels between the characters. And that would be enough to signal to us that this is a fake. Despite the fact that those first readers who actually picked this book up were picking up something whose metatext, the writing on the dust jacket, clearly told them it was true and not fiction. It's still on us, the reader, to spot the difference. And the clues lie in its literariness and its referencing other works. Barbara goes on to refer to the diary from which Price takes her story a number of times in her introduction. Whenever Price is at her most moving, vivid, and powerful, she's doing a better job than Remarque, Barbara suggests, and that she must be drawing on the diary. She says, she dwells on the details of dailiness with powerful particulars of sleeplessness, bad food, dirt, lousiness, driving screaming stretcher cases in the dark over terrible roads, clearing up after gangrene cases, living with the mutilated and the dead. Some details may come from Young's diary. A dead WAAC, Cheery, looks naked without her right arm, and another, Blimey, complains as she dies that the blood is ruining her new Burberry. So are we to assume that it would be too transgressive for Price to have made these details up, or to have embellished the diary with such gory, powerful stuff? Well, the intriguing thing is that no one, as far as I know, has ever seen this diary. We only have Price's word for it that there was one. And yet Hardy not only takes her word for it, but is imagining which passages must be from it, and by doing so giving a hierarchy to fact over fiction. It's good, therefore it must be true. The writing feels like testimony, so despite knowing that it isn't, we look for the truth parts through the fiction as a stamp of authenticity. Critic Margaret Higonnet offers another way of reframing this fake memoir so we can embrace it. She notes that First World War nurse and ambulance narratives run from immediate diaries to fictionalized autobiographies. This is her category, fictionalized autobiographies, and concludes that genre doesn't map neatly onto truthfulness. So, in short, the book forges a very spurious truth pact with us, yet delivers authenticity effects. We get, as in the passage that I read, we have these short, fragmentary expressions. She says things like, I'm tired of boys' faces changing to old men's, mud to the hubs, the night coughing shells, we go on. We are not heroines, we are useful. And these clipped sentences do two things at once. They describe a world of triage and convoy, and they perform trauma through their own ellipsis, sort of jump cuts, images, what critics have called a kind of modernist montage. But, crucially, those same features are also craft. They're part of a shared literary repertoire that writers learn to use. Symptom and style can overlap. So we shouldn't assume that a jagged form is automatic proof of lived experience, nor should we dismiss it as mere art. So let's stop there for now, because I'd like to move on to, do you think perhaps the salt path next? Have a quick think about that, and then would you like to
on the
start there?
Yeah. And a bit more on the truth pact.
Yeah.
Is it based on a true story? Is a question that memoirists and fiction writers are asked, but for different reasons. And I was just noting some of the words some of these F words that you pulled out there, Kate. So fresh, faithful, and fake. There is an attempt by Smith to be fresh and kind of faithful to a certain understanding of the war record, but it turns out to be a fake. On the other side of this blurred line between fiction and memoir that we're exploring here, in fiction, when and this has happened to me multiple times as a fictioneer, the question, it's described with such clarity and vividness and freshness. Is it based on a true story? To which my response invariably is, well, all writing is from life. Mm-hmm. In some sense, all writing is life writing. But with memoir, the truth pact, the contract between the writer and the reader is that there is some verifiable fact in reality that people can check up, which obviously that's the rule that Smith broke. With fiction, obviously there isn't that verifiability. And in the example that we're about to move on to, the salt path, the question was often asked, why did Raynor Winn not simply fictionalize her experience if she wanted to tell a good story? But the interesting thing, and there's lots more to say about this, the interesting thing about writing a fiction that is part based on fact is that it does ultimately have to tell a true story. So invention does have to be shapely, with some reference to the surrounding reality that it draws from. Certainly when we're thinking within kind of national categories of books, whether we're thinking of, say, the Australian novel or we're thinking of the Canadian novel, we're thinking within certain categories. There's something about these novels, even though that we understand they're fictions, that corresponds to some sort of Australian or Canadian reality. Otherwise, the novels come across as sounding tinny or fake. Mm-hmm. So this question, is it based on a true story, has such a different valence across the fiction memoir divide. And just staying with memoir for a moment, and here's a bit of audience participation. Hands up those of you, okay, there are two questions. Hands up those of you who were aware of the Salt Path controversy that happened from sort of May to July. Hands up. Okay, forest of hands. Okay, those who were not aware. Okay. There.
Before we read it or saw it?
Sorry?
Do you mean now or before we read or saw it?
When it broke.
When it broke. Who were aware of it breaking? No, that you are aware now is.
Yeah, no, okay, so I should have put my hand.
Yeah. Okay. And hands up those of you who read the book or saw the film prior to the story breaking of the fakeness. Okay. So
can I add? Did anyone read it having heard that there was a controversy? Ooh, Shantanu, interesting, controversial.
So, well, there are a lot of hands in the room have read, have heard about the controversy. Very, very broadly, Raynor Winn, that's not her real name. I forget what her kind of birth certificate name is.
I have it here somewhere.
Raynor Winn's husband was diagnosed with a kind of Parkinson's, an incurable illness. And at the same time, around the same time, catalogue of disasters, perfect storm, everything was hitting them at once. Their house was going to be repossessed because they owed a lot of money. And so what they did, and the film is actually very good on this, they sort of set out walking on this wonderful path along the Cornwall coast. And, experienced, and these people must feel really defrauded now, they experienced the kindness of strangers, were given help, succor, advice by the people that they encountered en route. So far, so good. Okay, film with Gillian Anderson, and anecdotally, but this is again about this sort of interesting sort of, the glamour of memoir that strays close to fiction or that tells a good story. I'm a part of 2 book clubs, I'm pleased to say. One is a Dutch book club, one is an English book club. In my English book club, everyone had read this book. Unbeknownst to me, sometimes they don't tell me what they're reading because they think I'll disapprove. We're working through that. But anyway,
You should have invited them today.
well, we have a WhatsApp group, and when this story broke, and I should say that the folk in my book group, they are they are physiotherapists, they are nurses, they are teachers, so they're involved in the healing professions and the learning professions. They were, my phone was jumping up and down. Everybody was so distressed, not only shocked and kind of disapproving and outraged, but distressed that this story of hope and healing turned out. And in nature, we've all learned to love nature and embosom nature post-COVID, in nature. And beleaguered British nature, that it turned out not to be true. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what wasn't true? Just to put the story straight, and this is obviously still under, it's going through the courts now. I understand, so I need to use the right sort of language.
Yes, reportedly,
it is alleged that they were not, strictly speaking, homeless. They did have a property in France. It is, which however was a ruin, not habitable. His illness, was it, a kind of terminal form of Parkinson's, or was it a more of a chronic, a recurrent illness? There are some questions about that. And then most outrageously for many readers was that the fact that their home was repossessed and that they had debts was because Raynor Winn, in real life, had embezzled funds from her previous employer. So, an extraordinary fake. Mm-hmm. But the interesting thing to me, and I started to, because of my fascination with this question of what is a true story. And why are we so shocked when something is fake or fictionalized? One of the leading threads is not so much the lying about or the posing about the money. It's more the passing off of this story of healing as untrue.
That's interesting. So, because to me it was not necessarily the passing off of the story of healing that we feel if we're going to believe in this as some sort of religious parable, then it's not solid ground. It was that it's such a sob story. So, just read a little bit from the beginning, shall we, so you get a flavour of the book.
I have the Dutch one.
Perhaps don't read that one. Just give you the very first page. I was under the stairs when I decided to walk. In that moment, I hadn't carefully considered walking 630 miles with a rucksack on my back. I hadn't thought about how I could afford to do it, or that I'd be wild camping for nearly 100 nights, or what I'd do afterwards. I hadn't told my partner of 32 years that he was coming with me. Only minutes earlier, hiding under the stairs had seemed a good option. The men in black began hammering on the door at 9 a.m., but we weren't ready. We weren't ready to let go. I needed more time. Just another hour, another week, another lifetime. There would never be enough time. So we crouched together under the stairs, pressed together, whispering like scared mice, like naughty children waiting to be found. The bailiffs moved to the back of the house, banging on the windows, trying all the catches, looking for a way in. I could hear one of them climbing onto the garden bench, pushing at the kitchen skylight, shouting. It was then that I spotted the book in a packing box. I'd read 500-mile walkies in my 20s, the story of a man who walked the southwest coast path with his dog. Moth was squeezed in next to me, his head on his knees, his arms wrapped around in self-defense, and pain and fear and anger, above all, anger. Life had picked up every piece of ammunition possible and hurled it at him full force in what had been 3 years of endless battle. He was exhausted with anger. I put my hand on his hair. I'd stroked that hair when it was long and blonde, full of sea salt, heather and youth, brown and shorter, full of building plaster and the kids' play day. He needs to wash his hair, doesn't he? And now silver, thinner, full of the dust of our life. I'd met this man when I was 18. I was now 50. We'd rebuilt this ruined farm together, restoring every wall, every stone, growing vegetables and hens and 2 children, creating a barn for visitors to share our lives and pay the bills. And now, when we walked out of that door, it would all be behind us, everything behind us, over, finished, done, etc., etc. So just to fill in some of those details, these are in fact Sally and Tim Walker, not Moth and Raynor Winn. And that's an interesting one, that, whether we're disgruntled if we believe we're not, the names are wrong, what it means to change a name is a kind of distancing, isn't it? They learn shortly after the bailiffs have taken their house, or I think we'll possibly do just before it, that Moth only has a very short amount of time to live with this terrible degenerative illness. But in fact, the charity that supports people with CBD and progressive supranuclear palsy said in a statement that it was shocked and disappointed and has completely cut ties with them, because there seems to be no way that he could possibly have that condition, as he's been going for years beyond what anyone would ever expect. And of course, that's great for him. I don't want to wish the poor chap any illness, but the premise of the book is that they have what might only be months to live, and so they walk into the light. And yeah, and she made 9.5 million on this book, which, I mean, obviously it's the kind of money we make all the time on our publications, but but we're not generous, and so yeah. There's a lot to be said about it, but it is fascinating, as you say, your phone jumping with your friends, that there is an absolute sense of sort of hissing outrage that this generates in a way that what I find fascinating, Evadne Price posing as Helen Zenna Smith doesn't. She has fantastic literary scholars absolutely advocating for her, and it's a really good book. Is it something to do with the quality of the writing? Is it something to do with the plea for sympathy, for the, oh, woe is me, everything's been thrown at us, poor us, we are guilty of none of this, we're victims of misfortune?
Also the story of overcoming, I think.
The narrative arc, which this doesn't have. She just, her soul dies at the end.
Yeah. So, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to shout. I mean, these are 2 kind of stark and interesting and very compelling examples, very different too, of the fake memoir. And you also gave the James Fry example. Some people may remember right back to the 1990s when a woman called Helen Demishenko, does this ring a bell? Real name Helen Darville, published in Australia a memoir, a Holocaust memoir, in which she claimed that she was telling her Ukrainian father's story, and I mean, it's a very complicated story. It's to do with prison guards in Treblinka camp, the book was accoladed, was widely reviewed. She was hailed as a significant talent, and then it was exposed as untrue. A lot of people were as you can imagine, extremely upset about that. So again, and now we should probably flip it and go over to the fiction side of the fence. The question that these examples that we've touched on so far raise is, there was clearly a question, and you've touched on this, Kate. There was a question for these writers of, I'm going to tell a better story or more believable story if I present as and a more cathartic story if I present this as memoir.
Yeah. But also about what true means, you know, whether this is. I think in the Holocaust family story that wasn't case, I think she said something in her defence about this. I kind of believed it myself, you know. So for her, it was her truth, even though in terms of point of fact, it wasn't true. It was a fabrication, but it was an amalgamation of the stories that were sort of around and about in the air, and she's somehow drawn them all together and created a story, but was asking us to believe it to be factually accurate. And so I think Raynor Winn, or Sally Walker's defence again is that yes, she's, you know, but basically the essence of it is true. The emotional truth is there. And again, it comes back to that, the sort of felt truth and the provable truth, doesn't it? That there are, and how little detail do you need to fabricate before the entire thing is negated and under suspicion?
Well, this is very interesting. Would you like to say something about your cello book, or would you like me to?
Yeah, no, sure.
Yeah, so
or you do. That's fine, whichever.
Well, I'll start, and you can, you're the writer of the book, so you can fill in. So Kate has written this, as I already mentioned, this biography of an object, the cello, across modern history, and the Holocaust actually does come into it too. And what Kate did in part was to travel, to go on the trail of certain famous cellos that have become lost or have been destroyed and reconstituted. Now, and there have been wonderful reviews, and it is an amazing read. And I'm not just saying that because I'm sitting here on this platform.
But you are obliged to. It's a terrible book. Never read it.
But there was a great review in the LRB of this book last week, I think, by Thomas Lecoeur, and he gives us to understand in his reading anyway. And I've read the review and I've read the book, so you know. He gives us to understand that Kate was basically busy traveling on the trail of these cellos for 2 years and more during COVID, lockdown, you know, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Yeah, Kate was almost like on the front line of all these of all these situations. Not true. I know this not to be true because Kate was here in Wolfson in the Life Writing Centre. So I'm going to throw the question back to you, Kate. And you know, it is the case that you do build travel and being on the trail of these cellos into the book, into the story. Can you enlarge on that a bit? Because you know, you're not fictionalizing. You have written a complicated, multi-stranded history of cellos over time. But you did build in this kind of structuring motif. So in a sense, you were playing across that line between,
absolutely.
Between fiction
and I could very rightly be hoisted by my own petard, couldn't I? As we sit here moralistically judging poor old Raynor Winn, despite her 9.8 million, you could very rightly say that this book reads, at least to this reviewer who has given this very long précis of it in the London Review of Books, as if I left home for 2 years and never came back. I've got small children, I run the centre here, I've got various sort of teaching, all kinds of other things. Plus, I started writing it in lockdown, so that is palpably impossible. But what I did, what I did was visit all the places that are in the book, lots of them in conjunction with each other, but some of them not for very long, and I just wrote like fury on the train in between them. And then I might have come home for a few weeks, picked up what was going on in term, sorted out the children, written a lot more again, made contacts, set up the next interviews and the next Airbnbs, and then off I went again. So there was a kind of dipping back and forth. Sometimes I was going from France to Germany to Italy to Lithuania to Poland, but the time span as it appears in the book is actually not completely accurate. There is a map of my travels, which is accurate. I did those countries in that order. But what I didn't draw on the map, because it would look absurd, was the whipping back on the Eurostar because one of my children's got a French horn concert or something like that, and then back off you go. So because it's not interesting and it's not relevant, and it would completely disrupt the story, and it's structurally important for the journey to take the shape that it does, to follow in the footsteps of these other musicians. Now, for full disclosure, I could chart the times when I have to go home for a parents' evening or to chair a talk here at the Life Writing Centre and then back off again. But it would have ruined the book. So I had to take that decision that I would not mention the journeys where I'm coming home and going back out again, but just give you the journeys that are actually interesting, that are relevant to the book. So that's structural. It's a stylistic decision. But is it honest? I don't know. You know, I'd love to be in a position where I've got enough childcare because I'm earning this kind of money that I could disappear for 2 years.
But I mean, just to throw a kind of literary critic kind of comment back to you, the book is, I mean, the traveling works as a motif for us, the reader. We have no question or concern about the fact that you did the,
absolutely,
undertook the journeys. But it is also the case, and this is where kind of fabrication and storytelling and shaping a narrative so that it's pleasing and a good read for a reader, whether it's fact or whether it's fiction or whether it's a mix. The thing is with the cello book is that it's a quest pattern story. Okay, it's multiple quests. I mean, and actually, there's one. I won't give it away. It's an amazing story in the book. There is one quest that only actually comes to fruition, or you kind of find the Holy Grail, the special cello that you're seeking, only after the book comes out.
Yeah. A week before the book launch.
A week before. So there is a quest, and so it works. You know, there's a harmony there. What that does do, and I want to sort of speak more generally too here. What that does do is remind us that whether memoir or fiction, it is important to tell a good story. The question, the crucial dilemma for any writer is where that good story impacts either lifelikeness for fiction or for realist fiction, or truth-telling for memoir.
And so for me, that I made that decision because it would have been incredibly dull to hear me whipping back and forth in between. But the emotional truth at the beginning of the book was also structurally important, that the reason why I'm making this pilgrimage to find these other cellist stories who have complicated, fractured relationships with their instrument is because I sustained a kind of life-changing injury as a young cellist. Now, if I'd made that bit up, I think that would be that for me would be the other side of okay, and so that's perhaps getting closer to what's happening here with the Salt Path. That if I'm going to elicit sympathy, squeamish though I found it to write it, you have to know why I care so much about all these cellos, you know, and that's why. And so that cathartic healing journey, I suppose it does come back to healing, doesn't it? Has to be absolutely true, and that's what's been that's what we've been duped with here, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So swiveling around to the fiction side of the blurred line, in The Shouting in the Dark, the protagonist and the narrator, the eye narrator, is called Ella. My name is Elleke. There are parallels between Ella's life growing up and my own. There are, however, many divergences too. I have multiple times, the book came out a number of years ago now, so there have been a number of discussions and interviews about it. I have multiple times been asked, because of that overlap between your experiences and hers, why did you not write it as autobiography? I said, well, because it's a fiction. It touches on a very important subject, which is war trauma, and growing up with a father who had post-traumatic stress disorder. We know now, at the time, we were simply confused and bruised. And because of that, because there's a really important story there about sort of, working out little by little through, ups and downs and trials and errors, working out that this was the case. Mm-hmm. Interviewers have said to me multiple times, well, you should have written it as a memoir. To which I respond, yes, but I would precisely, I think, have erred on the side of Raynor Winn, because a lot is made up to tell a better story.
So the critical thing is that this has never been presented as your memoir. Mm-hmm. It is a novel. And the more we know you, the more we think, ooh, this person's got a very similar name. They live in South Africa. They are of Dutch origin. They move between the Netherlands and South Africa. I wonder how much of this is Elleke. And it's fascinating. I mean, I read this to teach it to a group of wonderful readers. And they'd never met Elleke, and almost every question they asked as we were preparing for our session, to which Elleke would come, is it made up? Is it true? How much is Elleke's life? How much isn't it? And it shouldn't, I'm fascinated by that, because I know you so well, but it shouldn't have mattered so much to them. And I found that really interesting, that you were a name to them, and yet they were deeply invested in whether which bits are true and which bits aren't. But of course, the emotional truth of it is a whole different thing, isn't it? The emotional truth stands, that presumably this, whether or not the names are changed, whether or not the details of your father's and this father's war trauma are the same, what it feels like to be young, to be vulnerable, to not understand why your parents behave in appalling, erratic, irrational ways, and to come to some kind of understanding of that as you come of age, I imagine is a truth for you, whatever the details are here.
Yeah, and another important thing about why, in the end, I chose to write it as a fiction, is that the fiction also asks questions about how we come to know things. How, as I built into my short summary a moment ago, how we come to understand that something isn't right in this situation, in that. Fiction about a family dilemma. So there's a great deal, and this is where the motif, as in the quest motif that you use in the cello, the motif that I use is of the proscenium and of kind of eavesdropping, kind of listening in. There's a great deal of Ella, which is made up. Let me assure you, it's made up. But it was a fantastically rich device to work with in writing this. Ella is constantly at keyholes, at windows, and in crannies, kind of overhearing, putting two and two together, which.
There's a lot about looking. She's accused of goggling all the time. It's this sort of ugly word for seeing. And we experience her life through her eyes. So as a device, it's brilliant, because you, as a novelist, you can control how much we're allowed to see as she fails to understand what the situation is, and as she increasingly becomes aware. You can sort of drop in with your dropping pipette, sort of, information and realization and moments of epiphany by listening, by glimpses, by overheard fragments, and we piece them together perhaps faster than she does. But you're absolutely in control of our levels of understanding, which would be much harder to pull off and perhaps too crafted or too controlling in a non-fiction work, in a memoir.
And it's also, this is just a footnote to that it's also a first-person narrative told in the present tense. Incredibly hard to do. It was so tough, which basically confined me as narrator in the moment of Ella's growing up and her coming to awareness and her coming to certain kinds of understanding about the situation that she's in. So I could, at every moment, she couldn't know more than she could possibly know at that point of being 13, 14. We had to be within her frame, looking at the situation from her point of view.
Would you like to read a little bit, just so we get a sense of that? Because it is masterly. I mean, it's quite a thing to pull off. In fact, it's exactly the same perspective that we get in Not So Quiet, interestingly, that present first person.
I'm not sure where to, do you have any suggestions, Kate? And then we should open for, because there must be questions in the room.
The getting on the flight with the mother. Okay, and the parents are the mother and the father. They're archetypes, aren't they? They're distanced, and you play with distance and proximity in the relationships, these extraordinary dysfunctional relationships, through the way you present it.
But the problem with traveling up and down the African continent isn't only the flying. For the mother, the flying is made worse by the regular stops they must make so that the plane can refuel. This is in the olden days. This is the 1970s. For the mother, the flying is made worse by the regular stops they must make so that the plane can refuel, Sleek and modern though it looks, the airplane cannot complete the journey from far south to high north without 1 or 2 touchdowns to take on more fuel. It must go in stages, hurtling its way from one African country to another, each time plunging down through the storm clouds into the forest or savannah. From where Ella sits in her window seat looking out, Africa high up is green gauze and grey cloud. Conical mountains point through the clouds to the sky. Closer to the ground, Africa becomes a broken ribbon, a narrow laterite airstrip bordered by red earth, unfurling in pieces of irregular length. I'm skipping a bit because that's far too much documentary. Look, Mum, see the airstrip down there, Ella says, how lit up it is. She taps the plane window. Be quiet, please. In her lap, the mother kneads her knuckles till they go red. Talking makes things worse. My only wish right now is that the whole of that landmass down there would just sink into the sea. I didn't pick a good spot. The mother has fear of flying and proceeds within moments to freak out. So I'll leave you to have a look at that in your own time. Shall we?
Yeah. Let's open it up. So anything at all, observations, questions, thoughts?
This interesting question of the blurred line, and whether for you there is an important contract there with the memoirist and indeed the fictioneer, or whether it's a more ambiguous thing.
And Charles will rove with a microphone. So.
Yes. I have a question to both of you, and it's primarily to Kate, though. The responsibility of an author to prove that they're telling the truth. So in your case, you had a reviewer who misunderstood those 2 years of your...
Yeah.
Will you write a letter to them and correct them?
No.
No. Okay.
It's a wonderful review. You read that review and you want to go straight to the book.
Right.
So
okay.
But I am slightly artful in the way that I date my chapters. So I give you the correct dates for say February 2022 or whatever for when I'm in those countries. But the kind of withheld truth is that in between I'm dashing back and forth to the UK trying to hold things together at home and here. But it is, by point of fact, it is correct. I was in those countries doing exactly what I tell you at those times. So I could say, by the way, I think you'll find, but it doesn't really achieve anything. And also I have, by omitting that, I have kind of given that impression. So I think I would leave it at that. But as I say, it doesn't feel emotionally important enough to qualify, and I made that decision in the way that I wrote it. So he's picked up what I was trying to communicate.
Okay, thank you.
But,
Yeah, I have a question, Kate. So I'm actually just looking this up in terms of what are the difficulties of writing an object biography in particular. And I'm just reading this off of Google, but it says it requires a high degree of authorship to effectively convey the drama of an object's life through interpretation and narrative, which can be a significant hurdle. And that also it's difficult to tell a single linear story about an object because they take on new meanings as they're used in different contexts or repurposed. So I'm just curious about, from your point of view, when you wrote this, I don't know if it's the first time writing an object biography in particular, but what were some difficulties that you experienced in that versus writing some other type of memoir or biography?
I have a Gurney book.
Gosh, yeah. So an object has a life. If you destroy it, it has a beginning and an end. It's made and it's potentially broken or becomes useless. But it doesn't have a linear trajectory in the way that a life does. We have the cradle to grave or the sperm to worm, as it's rather a less celebrity name, trajectory of a life, and that is your more traditional structure for a biography. So there's an obvious way to write that. When you have an object, it's not linear, it's sort of circular. You could be thinking about how it's made, about who made it, about the hands that held it, about what stories were told, what its significance is across different cultures, across different times, what its significance is to the person who might have engraved their initials on it, or who stole it, or who found it, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's harder to make that a straightforward journey, and to do that, I've mapped structural devices onto my kind of constellation, as I saw it, these many stories that I was drawing together. And it would have been quite hard work to read if there hadn't been a kind of a way through it from A to B. And so that is travel, and that is my own journey and my own sort of voyage of discovery to fall back in love with an instrument that I have a complicated relationship to because of this injury. So it's a discovery quest narrative, but it's also a travel narrative. 3-4 different lives at the same time. So it poses structural problems is the short answer, I think. But Elleke, you've written on objects and thought about objects as well, but...
Yeah, I mean, very differently. For me, an object is a think piece, and this is not unrelated to how you write about the cello. So I'm really interested in how we discover more about buried histories or lost histories, or about people's histories who didn't ever write their histories down, including First Nations people in Canada, South Africa, and Australia. And so how I've used objects is to go to the objects that they made, and to look at the craft, and to think about how a basket was woven, say, or how a moccasin was made, and how the life of a person kind of was shaped around that, but also how the object shaped the life. So I say think pieces because somebody who's making an object like that, very, very sophisticated objects, which are technically also very sophisticated, these fish baskets that Tasmanian Indigenous women used, they shaped to fit the fish, kind of when it kind of flops down, the dead fish. And, because of how it's shaped, you can fit more fish in the basket. Now, that is absolutely brilliant. Somebody or a group of people worked that out. That object became, over time, a think piece, and different people contributed. So that's
but also to develop that idea of the erased lives and silenced lives and gaps and what we don't know. An object almost never has its full story attached. You can never piece together everyone who's come into contact with it. And so it gives you a freedom to be able to acknowledge the gaps without having to fill them in, without having to make stuff up necessarily, in a way that if we were telling the story of a life, if you have a lot of gaps in it, you've got a problem. There are plenty of wonderful creative ways of overcoming that, but you're not obliged to make stuff up. You can stay within non-fiction because the object gives us a different narrative shape, I think.
A word we haven't much used, if at all, in this discussion is the word document. So much of life narrative conventionally conceived, biography, autobiography, memoir, etc., is based on documentation. I mean, it's interesting that there was or wasn't a memoir by Winifred Young residing beneath the Smith. But what do we do and how do we tell lives when we don't have those documents? That's a very big question for me, and this is where the objects come in as evidence.
This is so. This is more of an observation. I was just kind of given the question around objects. I was thinking of Marina Bonner's recent memoir, and it says "Memory of a Life Mislaid, an Unreliable Memoir." And I think every chapter is about an object that she remembers, that her mother's shoes, a piece of jewel, and how you can write kind of your own memoir. And I think it's through the layers of memory. So I just thought of throwing that in because the whole memoir, every chapter is about an object that she remembers.
And it would be fascinating. So she's signposting from the title page that it's a kind of a partial, misleading, potentially factually incorrect memoir, so don't hold it against me, and then using objects so that she can think in more circular ways and be extremely subjective. So it would be fascinating to see whether she allows herself more freedom to be more creative, to be more factually inaccurate, or whether she still actually abides by the same principles that we ought to do as well.
I mean, this segues. In The Shouting in the Dark, each chapter has a single word title, and they are kind of like that. They worked, these titles became symbols, and they worked as kind of thematic indices for me as I was writing. So, for example, monsters, bear, flights, parsley, bonfire, Canada.
I was very struck by the brilliance of the storytelling of the fraudsters. And I'm thinking, actually, that's one thing that fraudsters do, whether they're writing a book or telling you a story that means you give them your money. And I was just speculating on about how do we, as writers, need to kind of access our inner fraudster, but stay with the truth in order to tell a really good story. And I was also remembering when I was writing a novel, and one of the pivotal points was from a story that my aunt told me about the war, but I have no way of knowing if it was true. But I believed it was true, and she believed it was true. And so, in a sense, had I had that novel published, it might have been that it was true or not true. But I don't know. I just believe it. So it's a sort of very interesting dance between truth and story.
And what you believe,
Yes.
and whether believing it is enough
Yes.
to make it true. Yeah, absolutely. I think fundamentally that a fraudster wants to sell you a narrative because they want you to buy into it. And that's exactly what we're doing as well, isn't it? As biographers, as novelists, as anybody who wants to communicate a story and envelop people in the world that they're creating, whether it's non-fiction or fiction. So there are wonderful parallels, and clearly this kind of fake publisher trickster was brilliant at telling stories, and so good on him. It's,
And I'm wondering, has anyone telling a truthful memoir made that sort of money?
No, but that is actually, that's one of the things that irks us, right? Actually, memoir and biography verify these verifiable stories. Unless your name is, Chimamanda Adichie, you are going to make more money with the memoir or the biography grounded in documentary kind of evidence than you are with your fiction. I mean, this has been pointed out to me by more than one kind friend. Why didn't you write about your father's post-traumatic stress disorder and just have done with it? You know?
But I thought we just did it for the love. I didn't know we were supposed to make money. Revelation. But I was going to say, there are people who come to us probably in this room with amazing life stories to tell. I remember having this conversation in Tuscany on our writing retreat with someone who had an incredible story. And she was saying, but there are bits I don't know. There are gaps. I don't know what my aunt thought at this point or whatever. And I say, but so therefore I'll fictionalize it because of the gaps. And I was saying, but it will lose so much power if you do, because no one's going to believe this in a million years. This had cannibalism in it and a shipwreck. It would be a terrible novel. It would be ridiculously overblown. But as a provable work of non-fiction, it's utterly riveting. This woman is shipwrecked and potentially eats her husband or her fiancé, I think. It's extraordinary. But no one would buy that as a novel. So sometimes there is a reason for maintaining your stand on fact, because it's so ridiculous that as fiction it wouldn't work at all. We believe it more when it's fact.
I have some very kind reader friends who read my work, my fictions, and not only my fictions, actually, before I take them to the final stage of writing. And one of these kind friends, maybe not so kind in this case, so there's a scene in The Shouting in the Dark which seems to stray towards sexual abuse. And the friend said, I've got a lot of questions about this scene. I think you should, it's a fiction, isn't it? Why don't you should push this harder, reveal the sexual abuse that I feel, kind of there between the lines. And I couldn't do it. I mean, it didn't make narrative sense. It's kind of complicated, but it didn't work. I didn't even try, actually. But that's interesting. So there is actually also, it's this your second truth that you refer to right at the beginning, Kate, sort of emotional truth. It simply wouldn't work, even though this is a fiction.
And are there perhaps areas where you're not prepared to go, even though you have the free license of fiction that you've given yourself? That it's not necessarily that just structurally it wouldn't work. It's actually that for you it's not part of your emotional truth, the non-fiction truth internally of this experience. Yeah.
Really interesting discussion, Elleke and Kate. Thank you so much. So much nuance, I think, in what we're talking about here. And so I'm curious to think about it in another way, which is to wonder if maybe there aren't enough categories in publishing to cover all of the shades of grey that we're talking about. And so in Canada in particular, we know that either your book is published as fiction or non-fiction, and that readers might not have felt as deceived if they had had a different label for some of these books. So recently I published a book in Canada. It was published as nonfiction. It was creative nonfiction. Some readers on Goodreads, etc., took issue with some of the parts that were more creative nonfiction, even though I had a preface that addressed this very specifically. But in Germany, the translation was published as autofiction. And there have been no difficulties with this whatsoever. And so I wonder if one of the problems is a problem of categorization, right, that we don't actually have enough terms to cover the variety of genres that we're talking about, and that consequently readers do feel deceived because they're sold either fiction or nonfiction without being able to understand the book through some of the lenses which in fact are much more graduated in a sense.
Yeah.
Well, it's what, and I'm sorry, she's actually left the room to go and help with the pouring drinks that we're moving to in a little while. But Smriti Verma, one of my DPhil students, she is actually working on this burgeoning genre of autofiction, which kind of didn't exist by that, certainly not by that name, about 25 years ago.
So when does creative non-fiction become autofiction? Is it when you're writing about the self? And how creative can we be? And if you're autofiction or biofiction, can you be more creative than if you're on the creative non-fiction shelf? Perhaps we need no categories. Perhaps that would just be easier.
There's actually, Yeah, there's a while you vault up the stairs to the questioner up there, Charles. There's a great piece. On a handout that I found today, which is Edward Said, who of course wrote a remarkable memoir of his experience growing up as a Palestinian in Egypt, and then as a pianist and as a literary critic, and then going to America. And he writes here, and this addresses this interesting new category. I occasionally experience myself as a cluster of flowing currents. I prefer this to the idea of a solid self, the identity to which so many attach so much significance. Because when it comes to autofiction, what we haven't touched on really, or just sort of brushed the surface, is the self as a construct. The self as something that we make up and present to the world.
But both of us have experienced having to present a self to the world. When I write about myself as an injured musician and what that meant at the time, I have a whole, and I did a piece in The Guardian about it, and with the very clear parameters that that's what they wanted to hear about. It was that particular story. It's about one page in a book that's about 440 pages, but it's a story I get asked about a lot because it's my story. And I have still now streams and streams of emails and Facebook messages from lovely people that I was at music college with saying, we had no idea what you were going through. We remember your arm in a sling, but we had no idea. But of course, and I was going through all of it, but I was also going through all sorts of other lovely things and having a perfectly nice time in different ways. And it's one slice of a true cake. And you were saying the same, weren't you? I think about someone, because people see your childhood in this book and find themselves in it. And
yes. Yeah, so you presented one of these flowing currents.
Oneself, yeah.
Oneself. And
but there's a feeling of dishonesty. I feel I have to qualify their guilt at not sort of being there for me because there were multiple other selves concurrently. And while at times that was an overwhelmingly powerful part of life, there were many other lives being lived at the same time. And that, of course, is life, isn't it? That's our experience of every day. But you can't tell all of those in a memoir, and neither should you. So,
but sorry, we have.
There was a question. Sorry.
Yes. I'm no scientist, but I went to the Oxford Brain Days, as they used to do them with the continuing education, and being absolutely fascinated by the one on memory, and my understanding of it, and there's probably some scientists here, is that actually there is no such thing as a whole memory stored. It comes from different bits of the brain that put it together, and that once you've interacted about 3 times, I think they said, you can't any longer go back to the original. You can only go back to the narrative that you created, and that memory is itself very faulty. So in a way, the verifiable facts, as I think you called it, the things, the things that can be documented, the things that are irrefutable. But the emotional memory, there was some other lovely phrase you used very early on, the felt memory. Actually, you can't look back and absolutely recreate what was felt at the time anyway. So there is inevitably a blur. There can only be a blur in memoir, as opposed to maybe a rigorous biography, which is all to do with letters and and something very different. And however, I did feel horribly, horribly cheated by the Salt Path. I mean, there is a difference between lending a friend money for a business that goes bankrupt and causes you to lose everything, and embezzling money. I mean, you invest in somebody because you like them as well as their story, and then you do feel cheated. I don't know what this autofiction is, but I'm very interested to hear more, because I think all memoir has an element of fiction in it. It has to.
There's an American writer on memoir and fiction, who's David Shields, who says that it's a lovely little kind of, a one-line quote that's very relevant to what you just said. Anything worked on by memory is fiction. I mean, it's a great way for a novelist to get out of the trap of, oh, but you put me in your book, and I don't like my portrait. I actually had this. I was telling Kate prior to this event. I had this quite recently, and it was one of my short stories. Somebody who I hadn't spoken to about 25 years claims that they recognize themselves in one of my short stories, and my retort to this person. It's not a bad portrait actually, but my retort was, anything worked on by memory is fiction.
Thank you for saying it succinctly.
Yeah, one more.
I went to the John le Carré exhibit, and I saw the discussion on A Perfect Spy, which of course is probably the most autobiographical of his works. I found that fascinating. And during the tour, I found out that he's maybe not in the greatest of odor here in Oxford, because it's emerged that he was spying on the left here in Oxford.
I think it's been known for
what's
a few
that?
years. Yeah, it's been known for a few years. But
It's been
yes,
known for some years?
Yeah, but this exhibition has brought it back up. Yeah.
It was news to me, but it's, I don't know. Do you have any comments on his revelations compared to just this finding? Like, I had no idea that this was actually a lot of his life story that we were reading.
Yeah. It's interesting that you mentioned that exhibition. I advised on some of the work that's on display, because I contributed a chapter to the book, the tradecraft book that goes along with the exhibition, which was a wonderful piece of work to do, because it allowed me to go into his archive and to look at he wrote in an incredibly interesting way. He wrote longhand at first, then his wife would type up the notes, and then he would write. Anyway, it's a long story. We don't have enough time, but I would love to talk more about it. But what was startling to me, being an admirer of The Constant Gardener and an admirer of The Perfect Spy, and an admirer of The Little Drummer Girl, is the extent to which, sitting there with his papers, and I do advise anyone who's kind of donating their papers to an archive, be careful, sift through, your chewing gum wrappings and your, your billet doux to the, to the lady down the street who smiles at you every morning when you go to buy the newspaper. It was extraordinary to me that this archive, was so personal. It was, he was by no means just the writer who was once a spy, which is how he liked to frame his experience. He was, very complicated, and there are so many layers that just turning the pages of the Constant Gardener, of the notes and the rough writing is extraordinary. Really, really extraordinary. But yes, he did some very questionable things, including, I think, the kind of long-sufferingness of the wife typing everything up every day.
Wow. Great. Well, I think we should probably end there. I think there will be drinks outside in the cafe, and the quick people to get out there will be able to buy a copy of The Shouting in the Dark, which I heartily recommend. There is nothing fake or disingenuous about it. You will not be furious with Elleke.
It's all made up.
It's a free license, but you will not be disappointed. So thank you all very, very much indeed. And thank you, Elleke. It's been an absolute joy.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, all.